If you're coming from the previous lesson on JavaScript functions, conditionals, and loops, welcome back. If you're new here and you're just coming for the challenges, welcome. I'm Zach, and this is the Full Stack Web Developer Roadmap series where I'm taking you from never having written a line of code to deploying your first full stack web application. In this video, we're going to go through 25, maybe a few more. We'll see how it goes. But we're going to go through some coding challenges, and these are going to be at the very beginner level, so like very beginner level of coding. And what I want to do with this is walk you through my own thought process and help you understand how I'm thinking about this and how you should use the previous lessons that we have gone through. So lesson 3 and 4, where we talk about the basics of JavaScript. I want to apply those to actual coding challenges. Like I've said throughout this series, I'm not taking you extremely deep into the JavaScript programming language. There are other people who have done that, and I think at this point, when you're just trying to get off the ground, digging into complex topics like hoisting and advanced scopes and stuff like that, it's not necessary for when you're just starting, and you can fill in the blanks as you go later on. And partially why I'm making this video with these challenges is to help you do that. So if I haven't talked about it in the previous lessons, hopefully we'll kind of fill in the blanks here with these challenges. And to do so, we're going to do this on a site called Code Wars. And if you go here, pull up the screen, this is going to be the collection that I've put together. So there's 25 exercises here that I put into a collection. We'll see how it goes. I might add a few more if we blow through these. But basically, just hit the link in the description to find this series of questions, and then get to this page right here, create a profile. Go ahead and follow me too. Let's see what my profile is, Zach Gall. Just look me up, follow me, I'll follow you back so that we can do this together. And then once you get to the collection, again, link in the description, you'll go to this top left corner and click Train Now. And when we click this, it's going to drop us into each of the problems that I have basically chosen for this video. And I just want to give you a quick tour of Code Wars if you've never been on here before. I actually just started using it for this purpose, just to go through some practice exercises. But basically on the left side here we have the instructions. So it's going to tell us the instructions: this code does not execute properly, figure out why, basically fix it. You can see the output here. This is when we actually run our test. So if we run our test, obviously it's going to fail, and this is where we see the output. And then over here is where we write our solution. So we can write valid JavaScript code over in this terminal over here. And then finally at the bottom, this is the sample test that we can look at. So obviously this is a little bit more advanced than we're probably accustomed to at this point if you're watching this video. But this is going to basically be a bunch of code that actually tests the code that you write. So it takes the inputs or it takes a set of inputs, it puts those inputs through the code that you've written, and then it gets the outputs and checks to see whether that matches the expected output. So that's just a brief tour. Just a few other things. You'll notice that we're writing in the JavaScript language. That's what this video is about. Node is going to be the runtime. So Node.js is kind of the back-end version of JavaScript. But just like we've been working on in this series, we can, this is the browser DevTools console. And this would be, the same code that we're writing here. So nothing new here. And then finally, this Vim versus Emacs thing. If you click either of these, it's going to actually drop you, or it's going to create this editor right here into, like, say, a Vim editor. I have a video on this if you want to check out the Vim code editor or text editor, but don't click this for now. That's a whole different ball game that we would get into if we started using those. So keep those unchecked. All right, so from this point, we're going to go through the exercises. I'm going to walk you through how I'm thinking about them. The first one is rather simple. If you've been following along with this roadmap series, you'll know exactly what we need to do here. It's saying this doesn't execute. How do we fix it? Well, right now, if we ran it and did the output, we ran it earlier, it says it expected undefined to equal 1. So basically that's saying that we haven't returned anything from this function, and therefore we just need to add a return statement right here, and then we can test it and it should pass. So we pass it, go ahead and click attempt at the bottom right corner. It passed all of our tests, so we'll submit it. All right, once you submit a solution and you did it correctly, it's going to show you other people's solutions to the same problem. And this can be useful, but also detrimental, so listen up here. The way that this can be useful is by scrolling down and just seeing the possibilities, because you can solve every one of these problems in many different ways. And so sometimes it's fun to see how other people have solved them, and it also can open your eyes to different types of thinking that you wouldn't have thought about. So it is good in that way. It's not good because sometimes people will solve these in very clever ways. And when I say clever, that does not mean the best way. Now, I'm not a competitive programmer. I don't claim to be. I don't really have any plans on becoming one. But when you get into the world of competitive programming, it's all about optimizing your solution, writing the least amount of code or the fastest code, that kind of thing. And I'm not that. I just want to write some code that helps you understand the solution and help you read the code in the simplest way possible. And some of these solutions down here, for example, this one right here, this is unnecessary. There has, nobody said that you have to check and validate all of the argument inputs. So in this case, A and B are the inputs to our function. And what this person has done is basically checked to make sure that the inputs are not some invalid input. It makes sure that they're a number. And this is totally unnecessary for this solution. It never told us that we have to check that. And this is just overly complicated in my opinion. You'll see that there's a lot of votes for the clever. And in many cases, when you see a lot of votes for the clever solution, it's probably not geared towards the beginner. It's probably not what we want to focus on right now, at least. Now, I will point out one that's a little bit useful for us, and that's down here. So this would be our solution. That's what we came up with. We just added a return statement and called it a day. Now, there's another way to do this that is actually, it's very clever, but it's also something that we talked about in a previous lesson. So I think it was the previous video we actually might have mentioned this at one point. But basically, if you have an arrow function, which is what, we don't have an arrow function in the original solution, we just have this standard function, a named function, but we could set this function equal to a variable called multiply, and then we set it equal to an arrow function. And with an arrow function, if you put it all on one line, you don't actually have to put a return statement in there. So this is a nice thing to look at because it gives you, kind of opens up your world to understanding, oh, I can write it like this as well. All right, so enough on this. We're not going to spend this much time on every challenge, but I wanted to walk through how you think about these solutions here. All right, so if you clicked that button, so let me actually go back to make sure that we're clear on this. We'll go to collections, go to the lesson 5 practice challenges, and if you just click on one of these challenges, it's going to take you to that challenge, but when you click next, it's not going to keep you within the collection. So make sure that you've clicked this Train Now button so that when you solve the problem and click next, it takes you to the next one in the collection. So I guess we got to solve this one again real quick. So we'll attempt it with that solution. We passed it. Let's submit it. All right, and now we can press next kata or kata. I don't actually know how to say that. I'm sure there's a reference to that I'm not getting. Be sure to leave that in the comments if you do know what it means. Anyways, this is the next problem that we have, so let's go ahead and, or actually is this? Yeah, this is it. So let's train again. I guess I've already opened this at one point. yeah, when I was putting the collection together. So the function is not returning the correct values. Can you figure out why? So this is going to actually get us into the switch case statement that we talked about just in the previous couple videos. And if you remember with the switch case statement, this is basically like saying if and then else if and then a bunch of else ifs to test a specific condition. If you remember from the switch case statement syntax, we are missing something right here that is causing our solution to be wrong. And I think what's going to happen if we execute this, we're going to get Neptune every time. So let's see if that's the case. Yeah, so we got Neptune every single time. And the reason that's happening is we don't have any break statements here. So in other words, we're getting the ID passed in correctly. So that's passed in as an argument. ID is the parameter that we're defining within the function. And then what it's doing is it's looking at that ID, so that's in the switch statement, and it's saying, what does the ID equal? And then once it figures that out, it goes to all the cases, and so it says, does the ID equal 1? Okay, if it does, we'll set the name equal to Mercury, and then we'll return the name down here. But the problem is, since there's no break statement, it's always going to hit the last case. So let's say that the ID, we go down to the test and they're passing in 2 as an argument, and we're expecting that that will return Venus. So if we, pass in an ID of 2, it's going to get passed in, and then we're going to look at case 1 and say, okay, ID does not equal 1, so let's go to the next one. All right, ID does equal 2, so let's set the name equal to Venus. But instead of breaking and coming down to the return statement and returning that answer, it doesn't do anything. It's just going to keep going down all of the cases. So it's going to say, does case equal 3? Does case equal 4? Does case equal 5? So on and so forth till it hits the last one. So we need to add some break statements in here. And all we have to do is just put in break with a semicolon. And we'll do that for all of these lines. All right, so we've got our break statement. Let's test this once more. And this time we're passing it. So that's all we needed to do. This was purely a syntax error, and it's something that you would have had to kind of look up the documentation for a switch case statement or watch my previous lesson to figure out. So let's go ahead and attempt it. We know it's going to pass, and we'll submit it. All right, let's see what everyone else was doing. There's some clever solutions here. Obviously, this one is very clever, but I would not recommend doing this at our skill level right now. So looks like we did it okay. In this case, this person has opted to use a return statement, which is valid, but a break statement works just as well. So you can see that this was the top solution, most common, and that's kind of what we used there. The one thing I'll point out is I put a break statement after Neptune, but that wasn't really necessary since it's the last one. All right, we'll go to the next challenge. This is reversing a string. So let's go ahead and train on this. So basically all we're doing is taking this string and reversing it. And I know how to solve this solution with just a single line, but I don't actually know exactly how to do that. I can take a guess. So let me try and just return string.reverse and see if that works. Okay, so reverse is not a function, as I kind of suspected. So in JavaScript, as we talked about in the previous video, there's a bunch of built-in functions that come with JavaScript. And you can look these up. So we'll just say JavaScript built-in functions. And then we'll go to tutorials point. I like this one. It's pretty simple. And then if we go to the string methods, that's where we want to go, because what we're trying to do is reverse a string. So anytime that you're trying to modify a certain data type, you can first look to those built-in methods so you don't have to do something manually. So in this case, we're working with a string and we need to reverse it. So let's go ahead and see what we can do using the string methods. And it turns out if we're just looking through these different string methods, there's nothing that says reverse here. I had actually, for some reason, thought that we did have a reverse method. Don't know how that slipped my mind, but we don't, so we have to think of another solution. Now, realistically, if we were solving this problem, in the real world, where we had to write some code that reversed a string, what I'm going to do is this. I'm opening up Google, and then I'm going to type in how to reverse a string JavaScript. All right, and usually there's going to be a Stack Overflow post, because Stack Overflow is where you basically get the answer to anything when you're coding. And what's going to happen is we're going to find a solution here. So I wasn't that far off. We actually do have a reverse method, but this is not going to be entirely apparent to you if you're like a complete beginner. But what we're doing in this solution here is we're actually converting this to an array first. So let's go back. This is all I need to see for now. Let's go back to our documentation and take a look at the array methods. So if we have a data type of an array, we can actually reverse it. So it looks like there's a reverse method right here. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the dev console. Just right click anywhere on the screen. Let's just show you how to do that. Right click, inspect element. If you've been watching the series, this is not news to you. And now we can type away with any JavaScript. So let's see how we can do this with an array. We'll just set an array equal to 1, 2, 3. And if we want to reverse this array, we can just say array.reverse, and it's going to reverse the values in the array. So basically what this Stack Overflow solution is telling us is that we first need to convert the string into an array by letter, and then we need to reverse it, and then we need to join it back into a string. So this is a one-step solution where we can basically do it all in one step. We talked about chaining these built-in methods in just the prior video, but I want to break this out into individual steps just for clarity. So let's go ahead and do that right now. The first thing we want to do is split the string into an array. So basically it's going to take every character in the string and it's going to make each character a value of that array. So again, let's come back to our console. Let's say that we have a string and that's equal to hello. All right. And then we want to say string dot, what were we using here? We're using split, and we're going to just split it with an empty character. So if I can get back here. So we'll say string.split, and we'll put in just an empty character, and that's going to give us an array where we have each letter being separated in the array. All right, so now that we have the array, we can split, or we can reverse it. So let's just go back and do that here. So the first thing we have to do is put it into array. So string.split, and then we just need to pass in an empty character. And then from there we can reverse it. So as we saw, so we'll save it into a reversed variable. So we'll say array.reverse. All right, so that's going to assign it there. And then oftentimes when I'm solving a problem like this, I'm going to write some code and then actually test it out before I move on. So let me go ahead and console.log the reversed value, and then we'll click test, which is obviously going to fail. But what we do see is that we get some output. So you'll see that we logged this to the console and this to the console, which basically tells us that we have our reversed variable is an array, and that array is reversed from the original string. So the last thing we need to do, since we have it in the form of an array data type, is we need to take that reversed array and just combine it together into a string. And to do that, I think all we have to do is join it. So if we do string.split and then we say join, it's going to join it by a comma. So we actually will have to replace those commas. Let's see how the Stack Overflow solution did it. Okay, let's see. and we have to when we join it, we have to also enter that empty string right there. So that's just a little tricky part to this. So let's go back to our problem, and then we'll say final answer equals the reversed array. So this is an array, and then we join it by that empty character, and then we go ahead and return the final answer. And let's go ahead and test that. You can see that we passed all of the tests, so let's attempt it. I think we'll be fine here. And we solved it. So that's just how we take it out into different steps. Of course, we could have solved this by just saying we want to do string.split, .reverse, .join, and this we can delete all of these intermediate variables right here. We can test this, and it's going to pass everything. Let's go ahead and attempt it and submit it. So like I said, there's a couple different ways to solve it, but you might be asking at this point, well, you're cheating. Like, you went on Stack Overflow and figured this out that way. And well, yes, if I was doing a programming competition, I would be cheating. And that's why I'm not a competitive programmer. I'd never want to be, because Google is, your best friend when you're a programmer. And it is not cheating to Google something. So we'll try to do more of these on our own for the remainder of the video, but for now I just really wanted to beat that into your head that it is okay to go to Google and search something like that. And that's how pretty much everyone that operates in a real-world environment is going to do. So just a tidbit of knowledge there. Take it for what it is. All right, so we'll go to the next challenge. See what we got here. Okay, even or odd. Let's see what we are trying to solve. So it says create a function or write a script in shell. That's not something that we're going to do. That takes an integer as an argument and returns even. So notice that they're asking for a string, a capitalized string that says even for even numbers, or capitalized odd for odd numbers. All right, so let's see what we can do here. The first thing I'm thinking about is maybe a modulus operator, but I don't even think that we need to do that, or do we? Yeah, that is correct. So a modulus operator, if we were to divide something by 2, right? Okay. I don't know what I was thinking here. So just divide it by 2, right? So let's go over to our little playground here and refresh, just so that we can test a few things out. So if we got 20 divided by 2, that comes out to an even number. If we have 21, which is odd, divided by 2, we have a decimal. Now, we would have to complete some additional steps to actually figure out which one's a decimal, which one's a whole number. So I kind of like the idea of the modulus operator, because if we do 20 instead of divided by 2, but modulus 2, it's going to give us 0. But 21 modulus 2 is going to give us 1. So basically, every time we have an even number, doing modulus 2 is going to return 0, because there's 0 remainder if we do that division operation. So in previous lessons, we talked about this modulus operator in my video about operators. And basically what it's doing is it's doing a division problem, and it's returning what the remainder of that division problem is. So as we know, going back to basic math, if you divide something and it goes into it evenly, there's going to be a remainder of 0, which we're going to see for any even number. So if we do 40 modulus 2, that's 0. If we do 2 modulus 2, that's 0. So that's basically how we're going to solve this. And we could do some intermediate steps, but we can actually just return the solution. Or actually, no, we do have to do some intermediate steps. So if we need a conditional in here, we want to say if the number, so we're grabbing that from the parameter, and then the test cases are going to pass in different arguments, and then this parameter called number, just think of it as a variable available to this function, is going to be different per the test case. So replace that number with whatever argument you have, and then what we want to do is write an expression that says the number modulus 2. All right, so we want to say if that is equal to, so we'll use triple equals to check both the value and the data type to be the same, and we want to set that equal to 0. So if the number modulus 2 equals 0, then we know that it is an even number. So we'll drop down into our if statement and we'll return what we need to return based on the instructions over here called even. All right, and then we'll put an else statement so we know that if it's not even, it is odd. So we're going to just return odd in that case. And let's test this out. All right, we passed all our tests. Let's go ahead and attempt it. And we passed all of our tests. So let's submit this answer and see what everyone else did to answer this. I'm sure there's some more clever solution than what I came up with. All right, so this is just using the ternary operator. We talked about this very briefly in the operators video, but it's basically just a shorthand, clever way to write an if-else statement. And we could have used this, but I just don't want to confuse anyone unnecessarily. This looks to be our solution. Actually, there's not much variance here. So these are just abbreviated ways to write our function. They're just using the arrow functions rather than our classic function here. So we did pretty good on that one. Let's go to the next challenge. All right, we're counting sheep in this challenge. Let's see what we got here. Okay, we are returning the number, or the count, of the vowels in the given string. We will consider A, E, I, O, U as vowels for this problem, but Y is not going to be in there. Okay, so that's good to know. The input string will only consist of lowercase letters and or spaces. All right, so this is another point that I really want to bring up. If you're just starting out, you're a beginner, and you're solving problems, this is kind of how an interview question might be laid out, where the last part is going to tell you something about the input. So obviously the functions that we have been writing here, they're being executed by something, and that something are the automated test. This is a sample test down here, but there's code that's going to run when we actually click this test button. This site is going to execute our function with a bunch of different parameters to make sure that we implemented it correctly. You don't want to just test it with one set of parameters. You want to put in a bunch of different things. And with that, we could have an infinite number of things passed into this function as arguments. And oftentimes in more complex problems and harder challenges, they're going to challenge you to handle all of the different edge cases that might come up. And when I say edge cases, it might be something like, okay, what happens if I pass in an undefined value as my argument? Or what happens if I pass in a number instead of a string into this as an argument? Well, all of these things need to be handled by your code. So this last sentence here it doesn't seem very useful, and you might even ask, like, why is it here? But this is telling you something about the input. It's basically saying to us as the programmer, it's saying, hey, this is only going to give you lowercase letters and or spaces. And that's basically saying, in other words, we're not going to pass in numbers, we're not going to pass in undefined values, null values, Boolean values. All you need to worry about are, single lowercase letters and spaces. All right, so that is very useful information. It's going to save us a lot of time when we're solving this problem. All right, so it says enter your magic here, spelled incorrectly, at least in English. I don't know how we spell it in other languages. Anyways, let's see what we got here. So we have a starting point. Now, one thing I'm going to fix here they're using the var keyword, and in the lessons, I've basically told you we're not using this, and I also stand by that. So let's go ahead and set that equal to let, because it looks like we're going to have to reassign this at some point. All right, so this is actually a fairly easy solution once you've been programming for a little bit. How I see us solving this is, first let's put in our input into an array of some sort, and then I want to loop over that array and check if it's a vowel. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. There's actually a lot of ways that you can solve this, but let's just stay consistent with what we did in the previous one. So we'll take, we'll convert this to an array by saying string dot split, and then we want to pass in that empty character. So if you remember, what that does is it takes every letter of the string and it puts it out, it expands it out into an array. So going back to this tab, we'll just say, let's look at an array, and then, or no, we'll look at a string. So the string will be hello, and then we can just say string dot split, and then that's what it's basically going to do here. So it's going to split it into an array. And then from an array, we know that we can write a loop. So this is kind of the previous couple videos that we've been talking about loops. So we're going to loop over every single value in that array. So to do that, we're going to say let I equal 0. This is just the syntax we use for looping. And then we want to go for the length. So the array that we just created has a certain length, has a certain amount of characters, but we don't know that beforehand. So we're just going to pass in array.length, and then we're going to increment I using the increment operator. All right, so we're going through this array, and now we're just going to write a simple if statement. So we'll just say if, let's say we'll grab from the array each of the indexes. So remember, I is going to increment, it's going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and all the way till it reaches the end of that array, which has the individual letters of this input argument. So we're going to grab that, like basically this array or ARR bracket I is going to represent a single letter of that array. So we're going to ask whether that equals any of the vowels. So there's actually some really short ways that you can write this, but I'm going to go ahead and do this the clunky, really drawn out way, just because it's the most clear for a beginner. So we'll say if the array, or actually we can use a switch statement, as we saw in a previous challenge. So the thing that we want to evaluate is that single letter, and then we're going to come down here and we're going to say case, does it equal A? All right, if it equals A, then I want to take this vowels count variable and increment it by 1. So that's what we're doing there, and then we will break out of the statement. Remember, that's very important. All right, so we're going to do this for all of the different vowels, and we're just going to paste this code below here. And it's going to get all messed up with formatting. So let's see. And like I said, there is a much quicker solution, and I'm sure that we'll see someone that used it. But this is, in the scope of what we've talked about already. So I just want to stay consistent with what we've talked about, not throw any huge curveballs here. All right, so we're getting to our last one. Let's pass that in. We actually don't need a break statement for this last one here. And so basically what's going to happen here is we're going to loop through this array. So basically we're going to look at every single letter in the array from that original string, and we're going to ask, does it equal A? If it does, we're going to increment the vowels count. Does it equal E? Increment the vowels count. And if it doesn't equal any of those, the vowels count variable is going to stay where it is. So at the end of this loop, we're going to have a total count, and then we just return it at the bottom. So let's go ahead and run the test on this and see what we get. You can see we passed one of the tests, so let's go ahead and attempt it. And we passed all 5 of them. So we obviously got this correct, so let's submit it. Guess it didn't submit, so let's try that again. Sometimes this is a little bit slow. It has to actually run a bunch of tests. So, all right, so let's see what we got here. The first answer, very clever. This gets into regular expressions, which we haven't even come close to touching on, and I don't want to, so we'll skip that. This right here looks a little bit similar to what we did. So this is actually a double loop, so we're actually looping through two different arrays. I really don't want to get into that either because that will make anyone's brain spin, to be honest. Got some more regular expressions. Let's see. I'm just looking for the one that I was thinking of that would be a lot. Okay, there it is. So we looped through this array, and what we could have done is just checked, instead of writing out this switch case statement, all we would have had to do is put the vowels in an array, and then we would have to, take that array and use the includes method, and then loop through all the letters and check if that letter was included in that vowels array. So that's what I was thinking of, just a little bit easier way to do it. Looks like this person kind of solved it like us. But like I said, there's a ton of ways to solve each of these challenges. We can solve them however we want. So let's go to the next one. Looks like Jenny's secret message. I wonder what Jenny's secret message is. So let's train on this. I gotta take a little break here. Solving all these challenges. Tired. All right, here we go. So Jenny's secret message. Jenny has written a function that returns a greeting for a user. However, she's in love with Johnny and would like to greet him slightly different. That's romantic. All right, she added a special case to her function, but she made a mistake. So let's look at the function. It looks like we're just trying to edit some code here. All right, the first thing I'm going to do here is just run the test, see what we're getting. Kind of gives us some clues. All right, so now let's look at the code. Let's see what's happening here is that we have a single parameter called name. So that's basically saying, all right, this function expects a single argument to be passed through it when it's executed, and that is called name. Then we're going to use that name to figure out if we're dealing with Johnny. If we're not dealing with Johnny, then we don't want to add, any specialized message. We just want to say hello to that name. So up here, this is how we would do that. We're just concatenating a bunch of strings together. So we're saying we have a hello string, and then we're adding the name that is passed in, and then an exclamation point. So this is basically what we want to return for everyone except Johnny. All right, so that's what we want to return there. Let's space it out a little bit. And then if the name is Johnny, we want to return hello, my love. All we have to do here, I think, is reverse these. So what's happening right now is we're going through this function and it never even gets to this if statement because we're already returning something. So basically every time we run this function, it's returning hello, name with an exclamation point at the top. It never checks to see if Johnny is the name because that's like this code block down here just never gets reached. So all we have to do is cut that from there and put that at the top. So if the name equals Johnny, return hello, my love. So let's go ahead and test that, and it's going to pass. Now, something that you might be wondering about right here, if you've been watching the videos, is this if statement. So normally we write an if statement with these brackets, and then we would put the return right in there. And that's how I prefer to see it, but JavaScript has a bunch of little quirks. And if you have a simple if statement like that, where you're just returning a single line, you don't actually have to add the brackets. That's just a syntactical thing. This is totally fine. If we run the test again, it's going to pass. And let's go ahead and attempt it. So we passed the test. Let's go ahead and submit. Just going through a couple of the possible answers. Again, this is another ternary, or no, it's not. Yeah, this is using a ternary operator, so it's basically enclosing that ternary operator within parentheses. and then it's putting it in the middle of that string concatenation that we're doing. So very clever, but it's not something that we need to do. Totally unnecessary, and it's honestly not quite as readable as what we have done. All the other ones, these are rather simple. This is a nice one. This is a good solution. If the name is Johnny, we return this, else we return something else. We kind of did something similar, we just didn't add the else statement. All right, let's go to the next problem. The next problem is n divisible by x and y. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so we got quite a few examples. Create a function that checks if number n is divisible by two numbers, x and y. All inputs are positive non-zero digits. So again, this last sentence is useful because it's telling us, hey, we're not going to throw any, crazy arguments through this function. You don't have to worry about handling, different types of data. You don't have to worry about a string being passed into this data. In that case, you might have to convert it or just throw an error. But in this case, all inputs are positive non-zero digits. So it's going to be from 1 to infinity, basically. All right, so here are some of the examples. We might as well use these. So n equals 3, x equals 1, y equals 3. This is true because 3 is divisible by 1 and 3. All right, n equals 12, x equals 2, y equals 6. True because 12 is divisible by 2 and 6. All right, so it's basically, looking at all these numbers, trying to figure out if they're divisible by each other. All right. Immediately, I'm kind of thinking about that modulus operator again, because anytime we look at something that says, is it divisible by, that comes in handy. So, and then also the other thing that I'm thinking about initially is that it's saying checks if number n is divisible by both of these numbers. So this and is capitalized, which tells me that we're probably going to be using this and operator at some point. So just keeping that in mind as we solve it. Again, all inputs are positive non-zero. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to do two different math problems. So we'll say result 1 is going to be equal to n divided by x. And then result 2 is going to be n divided by y. All right, so we're just running both of the math problems and we're getting it into a result variable. And then from here, all we have to do is basically divide, let's see, so let's go ahead and console.log out these results just so that we can see some output that we're receiving. So we will test it. Obviously everything failed, but you can see what we were getting here. So we're getting some decimals as we might expect if it doesn't go into it evenly. Now, a good way to check whether a number is a whole number or a decimal is using that modulus operator. And if you think about it, if we divide a number by 1, it's going to always go into itself, right? Unless it is a decimal. So if we were to, let's go over to our playground here. If we divide this by 1, it's going to give us 20. 19 divided by 1 is 19. But 2.5 divided by 1 is 2.5. So it's not a whole number, it's a decimal number. And because of that, the modulus operator is not going to return 0. So if we did 20 modulus 1, that's 0. 19 modulus 1 is 0. But 2.5 modulus 1 is 0.5. So any whole number is going to, if we do modulus 1, is going to return us with 0. So we can use that in our solution here. So we'll say if result 1 modulus 1 equals 0, and then this is where that and statement comes in, and result 2 modulus 1 equals 0, then we know that we have a correct answer. So let's see what it wants us to return again. It says checks if it's divisible, okay. Okay, so we're returning true or false. So in this case, we're going to just return true, and then if that's not true, then we return false. So if the first result, the first division problem, and the second division problem, if both of those are not equal to 0 when we use the modulus operator, then we return false down here. So let's test it, see what we get. Looks like we passed. That's great. Let's attempt it. And you can see that we passed all the tests. Let's see what everyone else was doing here for this. I'm going to guess that a lot of people solved it this way. But of course, there's always these clever folks out here that are just solving it in one line. This is interesting right here. I'm not going to go into it. You know, these are not totally relevant to us. We solved it in a very straightforward way. It wasn't clever, but it was very straightforward, and that's all we're asking for here. So feel free to look through these. Let's go on to the next challenge. At this point, I'm going to try to solve these a little bit quicker, just so that we can blow through the rest of the video. I'll point things out as we go, of course, but I've kind of, harped on a lot of the most important things, like how to look at a test, how to think about it, how to Google, all that kind of stuff. So we'll try to speed through these a little bit faster. All right, so this one is return negative. In the simplest assignment, you are given a number and have to make it, or in this simple assignment, you are given a number and have to make it negative. But maybe the number is already negative. All right, so it's kind of implying to us that we have to check whether the number is negative first, and then we have to apply some sort of operation on it. So immediately we know that if we multiply something by a -1, then it turns it, the opposite sign that it was. So all we have to do is say if the number is less than 0, we know that it's negative, so we're just going to return the number because it's already negative. Otherwise, if it's not less than 0, then we're going to return the number multiplied by -1. And that should be the solution right there. We passed. I think this is going to work. It's a pretty simple, straightforward answer. So again, if you have caught on to this, when we're using the if-else statements, that's an opportunity to use a ternary operator. And you're going to see that in some of these solutions. So here is the ternary operator at work. It's basically the same exact thing that we did, has a little bit of a different thing. So you can just put a negative at the beginning of your variable to flip the sign of it. That's just a shortcut in JavaScript. But then there's another solution. This is actually interesting. If you use the built-in math function called the absolute method, that's going to turn any number to a positive value. So if we just turn everything that we get to a positive value and then reverse that to a negative, we're always going to get a negative value. So that is a clever solution, and honestly, I think that's the best solution if you just thought of using this. But of course, if you're a beginner, you're not going to think of using the math.absolute method because you probably don't know about it. But again, you can look up these JavaScript built-in functions, and I'm sure that this one might not show you. Yeah, so we have the math methods down here, and you could, once again, I'm on tutorials point, I just searched for JavaScript built-in functions, but we have these math methods, and the first one is the absolute method. So it returns the absolute value of a number, and if you knew that, you could think of it and just use that for our solution. So anyways, like I said, we're not going for the most optimized solution. We're going for the most straightforward and clear solution for a beginner. All right, so we're finding the smallest integer in the array for this one. All right, given an array of integers, your solution should find the smallest integer. All right, so this looks like a perfect opportunity to write a loop. And you can see in our solution here, this is actually getting us into the concept of classes, which we have not talked about one bit so far. But basically, each class is going to have several different instance methods, and then the find smallest int is actually an instance method. So I'm not sure if we might be able to edit this. Let me see. Well, as you can see in the test, it's instantiating this new class, so we can't really do anything about it. But I'm just telling you, don't worry about the class right now. All we have to do is implement this method and we should be good. So within this method, we're going to get some arguments. This is actually what we would call this would be params, because that's what the params are, what we define within the function declaration, and the arguments are what we pass through it. But again, in those previous lessons, I told you that arguments and parameters are two sides to the same coin, and in this case, that's been demonstrated there. We're using args and params interchangeably. All right, so we'll just change it to params to stay consistent here. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and loop through this array. So the params that we're going to receive is an array of integers. All right, so and then it says at the bottom, you can assume for the purpose of this challenge that the supplied array will not be empty. So we don't have to handle the case where it's empty. But it doesn't say anything. Well, actually, yeah, it does. We're going to get an array of integers, so we're good. So let's go ahead and assume that the params is an array. So I actually want to name this something even more descriptive. So we'll call this array of numbers, just so that we can remember what we're doing. And now we're going to make a for loop. So basic for loop here. And let's go ahead and go until we get to the end of this. So we're going to grab the length of that array of numbers. And then for each number in the array, we're going to check if it is the smallest integer. So to do this, we actually have to declare a variable here that's going to keep track of the smallest integer as we loop through the array. So let's just call this the smallest number, and we're just going to declare it because we have not looped through any of the numbers yet. So, or actually, yeah, let's go ahead and declare it the smallest number that we can possibly get. It's an array of integers, and we might get negative numbers. So let's just go ahead and initialize this at 0. So just for comparison purposes, you'll see what I mean in a second. So as we loop through this array, the way that we're going to get an individual number from the array is by using this syntax here. So we're going to grab the array itself, and then we're going to pass in the index, which should be I, which is going 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way till the length of the array. So that's going to represent our number. And just for clarity, I'm going to go ahead and say that. So we'll just say individual number equals that. So that's what we're going to do for each loop. We're going to declare and assign a variable for that. Then we're going to check and we're going to say if the smallest number is greater than the individual number. You also could have said if the individual number is obviously less than the smallest number, either way works, then we're going to set it to a new value. So if the smallest number is greater than the individual number, so the well, maybe we should name this something more descriptive. So individual number, array, we'll just say array number. That's a little bit more descriptive. I'm sorry, this is not right even at all. I just need to take a little break here from talking. So what we want to do is we want to say if the array number that we're looking at, in this iteration, if this is less than the existing smallest number, then what we want to do is we want to set the smallest number equal to that array number. So it takes its place as the new smallest number. And basically what's going to happen is as we loop through the array, it's going to check each number, and if it's not smaller, then it's just going to skip it and it's going to go to the next iteration of the array. So we really can come down to the bottom of this and return from this function the smallest number after we've looped through all of the numbers in the array. Let's go ahead and test this. Looks like we failed some, so I think this is because we didn't handle negative numbers. Let's see. Oh, actually, this is just a mistake on my part. So I initialized this at 0. But this is a problem if we have positive numbers, because if we have an array that are, full of positive numbers, So let's say that we had an array that looked like this. We had 2, we had 5, and we had 6. It's going to loop through all 3 of these numbers, and it's going to compare it to our already smallest number of 0. And none of these are smaller, so the smallest number at the end is going to return 0. So we need to actually not declare this. We're going to actually just declare it and not assign it. And then the first thing we're going to do at the very first iteration of the loop, we're going to set the smallest number equal to that first number. So we're just going to say if I equals 0, which basically means we're at the very first iteration of our loop, we want to set the smallest number equal to the array of numbers, and then we want to grab that index of I. And actually, we can actually put this below. So let's get the number that we're talking about first, and then we can replace this now with array number. Okay, so just to review what I just changed here, what we're doing is we're saying we're going to initialize this or declare this variable. It's not going to have a value yet. So we have to assign it a value on the first iteration of our array. So, the first value of the array, basically. And we know that that's always going to be when I is equal to 0. So first, let's get the number that we are looking at in this specific iteration. We'll assign it to the array number variable. And then we're going to ask, is this the first iteration of the array? If it is, I want to set the smallest number variable equal to the first number in the array. So now we have something to compare against, and in the same iteration, so still on the first iteration of this array, we're going to compare the array number to the smallest number. They're going to be equal, so we're not going to get there. It'll go through, and now it should work a little bit better for us. And now we have an infinite loop because I'm just getting scatterbrained here, and I actually set I equal to 1 when I was looking at this conditional. And that is a big no-no because what's happening is now we're going through this for loop. In each iteration of the loop, we're resetting I to 0, and therefore we have an infinite loop. And that is actually something that you'll stumble upon a lot, and infinite loops are not fun. So make sure you don't make that mistake. Let's replace this with triple equals, which is going to actually do a equality comparison. We should be better off this time. So we passed all of them. Let's attempt it. And we passed the test. At this point, I'll probably take a break because I'm getting a little bit fuzzy in the brain here. So let's submit this, and let's just look at what other people did. Obviously, there's a better solution in all cases, but I don't think any of these are at the level that we're at right now. At this point, I just can't even think anymore, so I'm going to take a break, and we'll come back and finish the rest of the problems. The next challenge is grasshopper summation, so we'll see what that's all about. It says write a program that finds the summation, the sum, of every number from 1 to the variable called number, or num. The number will always be a positive integer greater than 0. Remember, pay attention to this right here. We don't have to worry about negative numbers in this case. Let's just look at an example because I want to go through that first. So if the number is 8, it's just saying go from 1 to 8 and add everything together in succession. So the first thing that we'll notice here is that it's only adding 1. So it's not only adding 1, but the number that we're adding only increases by 1. So it looks very similar to a for loop. So we can probably write a for loop. So let's go ahead and template that out. So we'll let I equal 0 to start. We might have to change that actually. And then we'll say I is less than num. I is less than num because we want to go through as many iterations as we need to get to num, or the value that's passed in, and then we'll say I plus plus. So we start at the value of 0, and if we add 0 to something, that adds 0, so that doesn't matter. So we're fine doing that. And then it wants to go until I is less than the number. So in this case, we may have to actually start this at I equals 1, and then we say I is less than or equal to number. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's start it at 1 and then go up to the number. And for starters, I just want to print this out to the console and see what we get. So I want to print out I each time in the loop, and since it's not a very good, place to do that, I'm just going to go over here to my DevTools console, and we're going to paste that in there. And of course, num is not defined because we don't have that passed as a argument or anything to the function. So let's just put a random number. Let's put 10 in there and press enter. And what we're going to see is that it counts 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 10, which since we started it at 1, we get to 10. But if we were to start this at 0 like we normally do for a loop, and then we take away this equal sign, it's going to go from 0 to 9. And if we add all these numbers, it's not going to add up to the right sum. So it's very important that we start it at an iteration of 1, and then we go all the way up to 10. So we put that little equal sign. We also could have, deleted that and gone up to less than 11. But you kind of get the point. Just be conscious of that. Now all we have to do is make a variable called the sum, and we'll initialize that at 0 because we start at a sum of 0. And then all we have to do is say sum equals sum plus I. So when I starts at 1, so we're saying 0 plus 1, then I increments to 2, our sum is going to be stored at 1. So we do 1 plus 2, and then we go I equals 3, so our current sum is going to be 3 because we did 1 plus 2. So then 3 plus 3 is 6, so on and so forth. So that's going to give us our sum. Another way we could write this, if you were paying attention during the previous video where we went through the mathematical operators, you can just do plus equals and then you can say I. So what this is going to do is it's going to take sum and it's going to say what is the value of the variable called sum, and then once it finds that value it says take that value and add the value of I to it. So this is an abbreviated version of doing that, but again I'm going for readability here, so I'm just going to say sum equals sum plus I. That's the most clear way that we could probably write that. So then we get to the bottom, we've gone through all of our iterations, so this sum variable should equal the sum of all of those different I values. So now we just return the sum. Let's see what we get. We passed both test cases. I think we've got it. All right, so we passed all 105 test cases. I'm not sure why anyone would want to write 105 test cases for this, but nevertheless, let's submit our answer. All right, let me just check to see where we are within this series. We'll go to collections. All right, so we are on get the mean of an array. So let's see where we are here. All right, so we're right here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 left. All right, not bad. Let's go ahead and train on this. So get the mean of an array. All right, the instructions say, it's the academic year's end, fateful moment of the school report. I'll remember that. The averages must be calculated. All the students come to you and entreat you to calculate their average for them. Easy, you just need to write a script. All right, when they say a script, that's basically just saying you need to write some code. Return the average of the given array rounded down to its nearest integer. The array will never be empty. So you're always going to get a number in this array. And it says round it down. And what I'm going to think about immediately is we are going to use one of those utility functions or the built-in JavaScript functions. So how do we round a number down? Let's go to the built-in functions. We're already looking at the math methods. And we can see that if we look at the floor method or function, it says it returns the largest integer less than or equal to a number. So basically rounds it down. So math.floor is going to round our numbers down. And if we go to the console here, let's go ahead and clear this because we got so much stuff going on. And if we say math.floor and then pass in a number 20.54, it's going to give us 20. So it just rounded it down. So that's basically the round down function. We're going to use that in our practice or our challenge here. This is kind of a useless comment. Once again, this marks right here, I don't like the name that they've given this, so I'm going to rename it because we can name our parameters anything that we want. So I'm going to say score array. So we're going to have all of the test scores or whatever scores we're doing here. Now within that array, let's see, what do we have to do again? We have to get the average. Okay. So what is the average? The average is going to be the sum of all the numbers divided by the count of all the numbers. All right, so that's your average formula. Pretty simple there. So to get the count, that's the easy part. We'll just say the score array dot length. So that's going to give us how many numbers are in this array. And then for the sum, unfortunately, this is something I know from just writing code. There is no sum function of an array like built into JavaScript. So if you were to go to Google, let's go to Google and search how to sum values in array JavaScript. And let's go to Stack Overflow. You can use this method called reduce, and then you can actually use an arrow function. But this is rather complicated, and it's not really at the level that we're trying to be at right now. Right now, we're just trying to do it in the most straightforward way possible, and this kind of comes later when you're more experienced writing JavaScript code. So in our case, we can do it a little bit easier with a for loop. So all we have to do is write ourselves a loop, start it at index of 0. We want to go until we've hit all the numbers in the array. So we can actually, in this case, we've already gotten the length of the array. So all we have to pass in here is the variable count that we stored that in. So that's a way to simplify your code. And then finally, let's break down here. All right, so we're going to loop through each of these. And what we want to do is add them all together. So kind of similar to the last problem we did, but in this case, we want to assign, so we don't want to count, we don't want to say the same variable. So we'll say the sum equals 0 right now. And for each iteration, we're just going to say sum equals the existing sum amount, so it starts at 0. And then each time we iterate through the array, so the score array, we're going to grab that individual number that we're looking at and add it to the existing sum. So now we get down here to the bottom, we have the count and we have the sum. So let's go ahead and just return the average, which is going to be the sum divided by the count. Let's see what this results in. All right, so we passed 2 of them, but we failed 1 of them. And the reason is because we forgot to round down. I forgot that requirement. So all we need to do is surround this with the math.floor function, and that should return the right answer. I could have broken this out onto the another line just for simplicity. So we'll say the average is the sum divided by the count, and then we can say rounded down equals math.floor, and then pass in the average. So take the variable we just assigned here. And then we just want to return the rounded down variable, and that should give us the same answer. Hopefully we get this right this time, and we did. Let's attempt it. We should be able to get this. Awesome. So that's just how we would solve that problem. So as you can see, just to take a slight break and review what we're doing here, a big part of solving these problems is obviously getting the instructions right and understanding what type of input we're going to be receiving into this function. The second part, with these easier challenges, we're going to do a lot of looping through arrays and stuff like that. And that is actually really consistent with the real world. When we're writing code and building apps, we're going to be doing, stuff like this quite a bit. We're not going to be solving useless problems like this, but we're going to be looping through arrays a lot and setting counter variables and sum variables, all that kind of stuff. So this is actually going to be testing us on very useful skills that you're going to use in the future. All right, so if you remember from that Stack Overflow question, they're talking about reducing it to get the average, and you can see that that's exactly what the top solution, or I guess the best practice solution, is doing. It's basically using marks.reduce, so this is going to get us the average. Then we're going to divide it by the length, and then we're going to put it to the floor, so basically round it down. So that's what I was talking about with this Stack Overflow solution. Honestly, if you ask me, it's kind of weird that the arrays don't have an average method. Seems like a very common one to have, but nevertheless we don't. So, all right, so this challenge looks like we have a picture to look at. Let's do some rock, paper, scissors. Okay, so it says, let's play. You have to return which player won. In case of a draw, return draw. Okay, and this is just a reminder of how rock, paper, scissors works. I think most people would know that. Immediately when I look at this, I'm not a huge fan of this. So we're naming the variable that we're storing this arrow function in as RPS, or rock, paper, scissors. I'm going to just rename this because we need to have meaningful variables here. So we're going to name it rock, paper, scissors spelled out. And then P1 and P2, again, these are not very descriptive. So let's replace those parameters with something that makes more sense. So player 1 and player 2. All right, so now we've got this written out. I like this a little bit better. Now let's go through our different cases. So first thing you might want to do is write some pseudocode. So pseudocode is basically, just writing out like logically how this should work. And maybe this isn't even considered pseudocode, but let's write out all of the different scenarios that we can have. So we'll say rock is R, paper is P, and scissors is S. All right, so for player 1 over here, and then player 2, and then the result. So let's go ahead and write these out. We have player 1, we'll do rock. And then since there's 3 different possibilities, we're going to have just a matrix of possibilities. So we'll go rock, 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 paper, 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 scissors, scissors, scissors. Okay, so that's all of the possible plays that player 1 can do. And then obviously we will go through with player 2 over here and we'll alternate. So we'll go rock, paper, scissors. And then again, we'll go rock, okay, so in this comment, we've written out all of the different possibilities and who's going to win in each case. So you can see that there's 3 draws, 3 times where player 2 wins, and then 3 times where player 1 is going to win, as we might expect. So how can we convey this, what we're seeing right here, in code? And to answer that, there's a couple methods that you can go about doing it, but once again, I'm going to try to go with the simplest, most straightforward, and easy to read method. So seeing this written out like this, where we have all these different scenarios, I think that we can say that we're going to go with player 1 and just have 3 if statements. So if player 1 chooses rock, if player 1 chooses paper or scissors. So we'll just put out those if statements real quick. So we'll say if player 1 equals rock, and then we're going to copy that down. Okay, so we got rock, paper, scissors. So these are the 3 scenarios for player 1. And then for player 2, we're obviously alternating between these. So let's say player 1 plays rock. So we could probably put a switch statement in here, but I don't know if we need to. So we'll just say if player 2 equals rock, then that's going to be a draw. So we're going to return draw. Then we'll say if player 2 equals paper, then that is going to be return player 2 1. And then finally, if player 2 equals scissors, then in this case, return player 1 1. Okay, so now we can basically just copy these same 3 down into each of these. And this is going to work. So this one's complete. So let's just fill out the rest of the results. So if player 1 chooses paper, player 2 chooses rock, it's going to be player 1. So if we're going paper against paper, it's going to be a draw. And then player 2 for that last one. All right, and then scissors versus rock. So we're going to say player 2 1. This one will be player 1, and then this one will be a draw. Let's go ahead and test this. Looks like we failed, and it's complaining that RPS is not defined, and that's just because I changed the name of the function at the beginning of this, which I guess I can't do after all, but I would not prefer to see it like this. It should be more descriptive. So let's go ahead and test that. And it looks like all of them passed. So we fulfilled all of our different scenarios that we wrote out for ourselves, but I can guarantee you that there is a more efficient solution, because in many cases we have like overlapping scenarios. But if you're just thinking about this logically and you want the easiest thing to read that, you know, even a beginner could go through and understand what it's doing, this solution works okay. So let's attempt it. We passed our test, and let's see how someone who is going to optimize it a little bit more would have solved this problem. Okay, so here's the first one. So it's saying if P1 is equal to P2, then we return a draw. So that eliminates 3 of our scenarios that we had to write out in separate if statements. So that's already reducing our amount of code by a lot. Then what they're going to do is they're going to put the rules within an object, which is actually quite interesting. So they're basically saying that for one player, here is the rules. So rock is always going to beat scissors, paper is always going to beat rock, and scissors is always going to beat paper. So that's very interesting how they're doing that. And then they're saying if P2, so player 2, is equal to the rules, so it's grabbing whatever player 1 responded with, and then it's going to grab the value of that and compare it to what player 2 responded with. Yeah, so this is a very, very smart solution, very efficient, but at this point, after solving however many we've solved here, 20 or so, my brain's a little shot, and we're going with the simple answer here. Now this is something a little bit closer to what we might have been able to do. So we could have combined the conditions into expressions. So rather than separating it out into a bunch of if statements, we could have combined them together. This is how we kind of started doing it. So obviously there's a lot of solutions to this problem. All right, this next one looks relatively straightforward. Oh, it says it's pretty straightforward. So your goal is to create a function that removes the first and last characters of a string. You're given one parameter, the original string. You don't have to worry with strings with less than 2 characters. Okay, so this is going to be a great time to use one of these built-in functions. So let's go to the string methods and see what we have available to us. And string, so this is what we're looking at. So we could use this character at. because we could specify the end of the string and the beginning of the string with 0, and then we could find the length of the string to find the last character. That seems a little bit indirect though. Let's see. We can also return a substring. This is actually going to be the most direct route here. So a substring is going to return the characters in a string beginning at the specified location through the specified number of characters. Okay, so I'll show you how we're going to use this, but first let's kind of get an idea of how it works. So if we have a string and that string is hello, what we can do is say string.substring, and maybe I want to start at the very beginning, which is going to have an index of 0. Now we haven't really talked about this. We've always talked about arrays having indexes, but strings also do as well. You can think of each individual character within this string as being a separate index. So H is going to be an index of 0, E 1, L 2, so on and so forth. So if we're starting at index of 0, that means we're starting at H. And then the next argument that we get to pass in according to the instructions that we looked at here, I kind of know how to use this already, but you could click on here and it's going to say we're going to pass in what we want to start with and then the length that we want to grab. So let's go ahead and grab 2 characters from this string. So we start at H and then we grab 2 full characters starting there and we get he. So if we would omit this, we're just going to start at 0 or start at the beginning and get all of the characters. But if we replace this with 1, we're going to get all the characters except for that first one. So we're actually partially to our solution. We've got the first character removed. Now we have to figure out how to remove the last character. And to do that, we have to figure out how long the string is in total. And to find out how long the string is, I believe there might be, I think there's a method for that, or a function. So there should be, yeah, string.length. So let's try that out. Let's get rid of this. And we'll say string.length is equal to 5. So if we know the length of the string, and we know that the string starts at an index of 0, we then know where our substring is. So all we have to do is say string.substring. We want to start at index of 1 because that omits the first character of our string. And then we want to end, or not end, we want to grab how many different letters? Well, we want to grab, let's see, the string.length minus, what would it be, 2? Yeah, it would be 2 because we've removed the first letter and we want to remove the last letter. So we want to grab just the total length of the string minus 2. Okay, so that is our solution right there. Let's just go ahead over to our problem and write it out. So this is pretty easy. We just return string.substring, or maybe we can break this out so that it's clear as day for you. Length of string is going to be equal to string.length. And notice how I have not added these parentheses at the end. That is just the nature of this function, and I just know this by experience, but you'd figure it out probably by Googling it or at some point after you try doing this. So let's say we try to do this as we would think. This makes logical sense, but it's going to say string.length is not a function. Now go ahead and copy this, just copy this, and paste it into Google, and you're going to get Stack Overflow answer that tells you how to do this, and it says, oh, you have to use just .length and you don't have to add those parentheses. So that's how you might figure that out on your own. But I happen to know that that is how we write it, so string.length, and then we need to get the substring, so we'll just return that straight away. String.substring, we want to start at the first character, or actually the second character, and then we want to get the length of string minus 2 characters. Okay, so let's see what we get. Passed the test as we expected. Okay, let's submit it. Now, as you can see, there's a maybe even simpler way to do this. So we can use the slice method. If we go to the built-in functions, if we would have looked So we grab the substring method, but there is a slice method which is right above it. So extracts a section of a string and returns a new string. Well, in this case, I was just not being smart. I overlooked that and didn't realize, but if you just read through these, this would obviously be a better selection than substring. But it does give us the idea that you can solve this in multiple different ways. And I'm sure that at some point, yep, down here, someone solved it the way that we solved it. In this case, they're doing string.length -1, which is very interesting. Oh, so this is actually not the same. So substring is different than the one that we used. As you can see, we have the one that we used and then substring. So these are two different methods. They work kind of similar, a little bit different. So that's why that one works that way. But you can see that this person used exactly what we did. So multiple ways to solve a problem. Let's see if we can blow through the last couple of these. So let's go to sum of positive. You get an array of numbers, return the sum of all of the positive ones. Okay. So we're going to loop through this. We're going to grab every number from that array, and then we're going to say if the individual number that we have grabbed is greater than, we'll say greater or equal to 0. Or I guess we don't even need that. We just say greater than 0. Then we want to sum it. But we need to have a sum variable, so let's initialize a sum variable and set it equal to 0. And then we'll say if it's a positive number, we're going to say sum equals sum plus the number that we're using there. And then at the bottom, we just return the sum variable, and we should get the correct answer. Passed it all. This is pretty similar to a previous question that we did in this video. So we'll submit this. As you can see, this is a well-commented solution that is kind of the same thing that we just did. So we didn't do too bad. Now obviously you can use a simpler method, so reduce, similar to how you'd find the average of an array. But once again, this is pretty complex. Like you're using a pretty complex function on an array, and you're using a ternary operator within here. So that is optimized to the max. So we got some basic mathematical operations. Let's go ahead and go here. It says your task is to create a function that does 4 basic math operations. It should take 3 arguments. So we want the operation, which is going to tell us, are we adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing? And then the 2 values we're doing. So this is rather simple. This person has formatted this function a little differently than we're used to. This is just a different way to format it. I'm just going to bring it back to how we're used to seeing it. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so the basic operation. So the first thing we want to do is write a switch statement. You're probably getting used to this at this point. And for the switch statement, we want to pass in the operation. So it's going to evaluate that and see what the operation is. And in the case that the operation is a plus, we'll do something, add a break statement, and then we'll fill in the rest of these with case statements. And then I believe all we have to do is just fill these in. So we can return from here, or we could set it equal to a variable. So since we added the break statements, let's go ahead and just initialize a variable. We'll call it result. And we're going to say the result is equal to value 1 plus value 2. We can copy this same line down. And then at the end, we can return the result, whatever we get. So let's indent these correctly. Doesn't really matter, just for readability. And then we'll just change the sign here. So we can put a minus sign here, we can put a multiplication sign here and a division sign here. All right, let's go ahead and attempt it. All right, that worked. I have a feeling that someone solved this in one line. We'll see. This is how we did it. Yep, right here. So this is very simplified, but let me explain what this is doing. So if we type in eval, let's look at JavaScript eval, and we're going to learn about this a little bit. So what this does, the eval function evaluates or executes an argument. So if we have three arguments passed in, we have the operation, we have the first number and the second number, and it's always going to be the same for each one. So each one we're just substituting this operation. Well, you might think, oh hey, let's go ahead and train again on this one so that I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So let's go up here, and in this case we might just say return the value 1 and then the operation and then value 2. Now this is going to obviously not work. That's not valid JavaScript right here. And all we're trying to do is we're trying to turn this operation into a JavaScript operator. And all we have to do to make that happen is surround it in this eval statement right here. And basically what it's going to do, I believe you separate it by comma separated values. Or no, you put it in one big string. So let's go ahead and create our string. So our operation string is going to equal value 1 plus operation plus value 2. And in this case, some of these are going to be numbers, so yep, that should work because value 1 is a string, so everything else is going to be coerced into a string, so that should work. So operation plus value 1, value 2. And then I want to just console.log that so that we can see what it represents here. So we'll console log that and comment out this return value for just a second. So let's test that. And you're going to see that the console log is giving us the following operations here. And if you look at these look like valid math operations. But right now we just have them as a string. But once we enclose it in the eval function, so we say eval and then we pass in our operation string, it's going to evaluate that string. So in other words, it's going to evaluate the string of 4 plus 7. And then we can just return the result, and this should work the same as our much longer code that we wrote. So let's go back and just see what that one person wrote there. They just, abbreviated everything but did the same exact thing. So just another way to solve it, more efficient. Next up, we have a string repeat. Write a function called repeat string, which repeats the given string source exactly count number of times. Okay, so this is what we're going to get. They're going to pass in, we want to repeat it 6 times or 5 times, and here's the string that we want to repeat. This is another classic example of where you can use a loop. So we'll just set a loop equal to just the basic syntax. We want to go until I is less than n. So let me replace these number of repeats and then the string that we want to repeat. So number of repeats. Okay, so we're looping through this, and let's go ahead and make a starter string. And we'll just set that equal to just an empty string here. Now, all we're going to do is concatenate strings as many times as this loop goes. So we'll just say starter string equals whatever exists in that starter string plus the string value. And this should return the correct answer for us. it works. Pretty consistent with what we've done in previous problems with the loop. And then we have a variable up here that stores some sort of value that we later return after we've modified it several times with values in a loop. And of course, there's an easier solution. So you can see down here that we can just use the repeat function. I didn't actually know this was a function. But if you go to the string methods, there should be some sort of repeat. So let's see. I'm not seeing it right now. What are they doing here? So that is a string method. Did I miss it? Let's search for it on the page. Don't see it here. This might be a new method. Okay, so maybe use W3 schools. It's more updated. That must have been a recently added method of some sort. Yeah, it looks like this came out in ES6, which is the newest version of JavaScript spec. So that's probably why it's not on the other site there. Interesting. So you can use a repeat string to repeat a string number of times. Very interesting. Okay, go to the next problem. Convert a string to an array. This should be very easy because we've already done it. At least I think. We've done so many problems at this point. I think all we have to do is say string dot split, and then we split it with an empty character. Oh, that's not how we do it. Okay. We don't want to split it like that. So let's see. Oh, okay, so we want to split it by spaces. So there's a space in between these words. So all we have to do is press the space bar in between these quotes, and it adds a space in here that we want to split it by. And this one does pass. You can see that pretty much everyone solved it the exact same way here. Should be getting to the end of these problems here. Congrats if you are still around and solving these problems with me. I would presume that very few people would be. So remove string spaces. So remove the spaces from the string, then return the resultant string. Now this one feels like there is some sort of built-in method that we can use. Since we didn't find the newer methods on tutorials point, let's go to W3 schools. I'm thinking something called trim. Yeah, like trim might do this. It says remove white space from both sides of a string. I think that's what we're looking for here. So let's go ahead and return x, which should be a string. Like, I don't know why they're calling it x here. Just call it a string. So string dot trim. Let's see what that does. This is not going to work. Looks like there's some numbers put in here. And it looks like the trim method is only going to do this at the end of the string. So let's try this out in our dev console. Let's do a test string, string that has spaces between. Oh, I'm just blanking out completely. I got to name this variable. So string equals that. Sorry about that, I'm kind of losing it here. All right, so if we use string.trim, it looks like what's happening is it's only removing the spaces at the end, kind of as this tells us. So I wonder if there's another method. Don't know if there is. So what we're going to do is we're just going to combine the methods together. So first, maybe we put this into an array. So we'll say string.split, and we want to split it by a space. So now that we have everything split out, now we want to go through each of these in the array, and we want to remove the white spaces around them. So let's go ahead and write this code out and see what we get. So we'll turn it into an array, so we'll split it by spaces, and then we're going to loop through this array as we've been doing. And for each item in the array, we're going to remove the spaces around it, and we're not actually going to build a new array. And so this is going to introduce the push method. So we'll say new array.push, and what that's going to do is add an element to the end of the array. So right now it is an empty array, and we can push items into the array, and what we want to push is going to be the trimmed version of each string that we have, or each different array item, which just happens to be the subsets of that original string. So in this case, we'll say trimmed string, just breaking this out for clarity, is going to be equal to the, what are we looking at? So the array at index I dot trim. So now we know that this string is trimmed together. There are no spaces anywhere. And now we're going to push this into the array. So at this point, let's go ahead and console.log that new array that we're getting. So let's test that. And you're going to see that we have an array in every case that's going to have, the characters with no spaces around it. And in this case, it's just an empty string that's not even a space or anything. So if we combine that, it's not going to add any spaces of any kind. At this point, we can use a method called join. So all we have to do is our final string is going to be equal to our new array.join, and we want to join it by that empty character there. And at this point, we can return the final string, and I think that that should solve the problem. All right, so we passed it. Looks good. Okay, I think we're closing in on the end here. Beginner, lost without a map. Given an array of integers, return a new array with each value doubled. Okay, so there's actually, it says for the beginner, try to use the map method. And this is basically just saying to you as the beginner, like, hey, you could solve this in an easier way, but go ahead and try to use the map method. So we'll do that. We might as well. So we're going to get some array. I'm just going to rename that so that it's not undescriptive. And then we're going to go and look at the map method. And this actually belongs to arrays. So we go to JavaScript arrays, and then we go down to the array methods or functions. And you're going to see this one called map down here. And what this map function is going to do is it's going to take the original value in the array and it's going to apply a transformation to it. And that transformation is just basically going to return a brand new array where every unit of that array has been transformed. So previously we have been going through these for loops and storing things in variables and creating new variables and stuff like that, but we could always use this map method. So let's go ahead and try it. So we're going to return the array.map, and then in this case we actually have to pass in an arrow function. So this is what we call like a callback function. We'll get into this a little bit later, but we're going to have a callback function. So this right here, let's just break it out, into a separate space so you can see what we're doing. So all we're doing is writing an anonymous function or a arrow function, and then within that arrow function, we're going to break down into the new line, and we're going to return a value. So this is a very weird setup here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and remove this. So I'm going to say our result array is equal to whatever this map function returns, and then we're going to return the result later so that we don't have that weird syntax. So basically whatever we return from this map method, or this function that's actually embedded within the map method, whatever we return is going to be the transformation. And then whatever we pass into it, so we can just provide a parameter. So array item is going to be what's going to be passed into there as an argument. So we're going to just say array item multiplied by 2, which is what they want us to do with each value. So this is going to return us an array with the values doubled in it, and we return the result. We passed. I would suggest reading up on that method, trying it out a little bit, but just realize that what we've done here is we've put a function within this other function that takes that function as an argument. So to summarize this, we've basically passed in a function as an argument to another function, and then that function actually executes our function that we passed in. So it's a bit of a tongue twister, but you will understand this with due time, and I would definitely put this on your radar as something that's very useful in JavaScript. At this point, I'm doubting myself for picking 25 problems. This is exhausting, but again, congrats if you're still around. Let's keep going. All right, is he going to survive? A hero is on his way to the castle to complete his mission. However, he's been told that the castle is surrounded with a couple of powerful dragons. Each dragon takes 2 bullets to be defeated. Our hero has no idea how many bullets he should carry. Assuming he's going to grab a specific given number of bullets and move forward to fight another specific given number of dragons, will he survive? Return true if yes, false otherwise. Okay. So basically what this is saying to us is that we don't know how many bullets are coming, and we don't know how many dragons are coming either, but we still have to figure out if this hero is going to defeat the dragon. So let's see how we do that. The rule is this: each dragon takes 2 bullets to be defeated. Okay. So basically what we could say is if the bullets is double or more than the amount of dragons, then we return true. So we'll basically just say, in this case, let's go ahead and use the ternary operator. I know it's late in the video, brain's probably fried at this point, but let's use the ternary operator. We'll store it in a result variable. So we'll say if the bullets divided by dragons is greater or equal to 2, then we're going to return true. Otherwise, we'll return false. And then we can just return the result, but we don't even need to do that. We can just return that ternary operator. So let's go to the beginning and hit return. So basically what it's doing is it's looking at this expression, and it's evaluating whether that expression is true or false. And then if it's true, we return true. If it's false, we return false. So there's actually some duplication going on here. We don't even need this ternary operator in the first place. All we have to do is return that expression, because if this evaluates to true, then the hero defeats the dragon. If not, then we return false. So we should be able to just do this. We passed it and it works. So that's how you would solve this in the most simple way possible, and honestly it's just a math problem plus a JavaScript expression with some operators. Array plus an array. So let's train again. I'm new to coding and now I want to get the sum of 2 arrays, actually the sum of all their elements. I'll appreciate for your help. It looks like this person was not writing a challenge, they were asking a question. Okay. P.S. Each array includes only integer numbers. Output is a number 2. Maybe they weren't asking a question. Very, very weird wording for this. Okay, so this is not going to work. Let's go ahead and test it as it's written. You can't just add an array together. But what you can do is you can loop through each value of the array. And this is actually a perfect time to talk about embedded for loops. Let's go ahead and do that. First, we're going to write our outer for loop, which is just what we've been writing all this time. So we're going to say until I is less than array.1 or array1.length, I++, and then we go into it. Okay, but we also want to grab the values of array 2. So basically what we're trying to do here, let's say that we have an array of 1, 2, 3, and an array of 2, 3, 4. Our resultant array should be 3, 5, 7 because we added the number at index 0 for both arrays, then we added the number at index 1 for both arrays, and then we put it into a new one. So that's what we're going for. I'm going to leave this down here for a second just for our reference. But in this first loop, all we're able to get is, or actually we don't need an embedded for loop. I don't know what I was thinking there. All we have to do is this. We just have to say array1 value is going to be equal to array1 I, and then we can come down and say array2 value is array2 I. All right, and then we want to say added value, something like that. So we'll say array1 value plus array2 value. That gives us the sum, and now we want to start building a new array. So new array equals something empty, and like we did in a previous problem, we can use the push method to push a new value to that array. So we'll just say the added value here, and now when we get done with this for loop right here, we should have this new array populated with our new value, which should be this resultant summed array. So let's return the new array and see how it goes. Looks like we failed in a lot of cases. Okay, let's see why. Oh, so I misinterpreted this question entirely. We want to actually give a single number. Okay, so I'm new to, okay, blah, blah, blah. So we got two arrays, we want to sum all of their elements. Okay, so we don't need a new array. We just need a sum variable, which is going to start at 0. So the added value, we can keep that. Then we can just say the sum equals the sum plus the added value, and then return the sum at the end. This time we passed it. Okay, just misread the question, and honestly, I don't know if this was the best question to choose. I think this is our last easy question coming up. Maybe so. All right, so this one has some nice clear instructions. That's nice. So the introduction, the first century spans from year 1 up to and including the year 100. The second from year 101 up to and including the year 200. The task is given a year, return the century it is in. So the century of 1705 returns the 18th century. Okay. I mean, this is just pretty basic, so let's go ahead and solve it. Now it looks like the catch here is going to be these two examples. So 1900 is going to be the 19th century, while 1601 is going to be the 17th. So like it says, if it's, one greater than the even year, then we go up a century. Okay. I believe we can use some sort of modulus operator here. Let me try. So let's say that we have a century of 1901. Let's go ahead and do modulus. We'll just start with 100. Okay, so 100 goes into 1901. Well, it would be what? 19 times with a remainder of 1. But if we had 1900 modulus 100, we get 0. Okay, so that's interesting. So what we could do is we say if the century we have modulus 100 returns us 0, then we want to just grab the first two letters or first two digits of that number and return it. So in this case, 1900, we just want to return 19, I believe. Right, so we just want to return 19. So let's just say that. This may be a bad solution, but let's try it. So if the year modulus 100 equals 0, then that means it's an even century. So we're going to just say we want to return the first two digits. And to do that, we can, let's go ahead and look at some of the number values. Okay, so pretty much what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to convert it to a string, grab the first two, digits or characters, and then convert it back to a number. This may be an indirect way to do it, but we'll try it anyways. So we'll say year to string, then I'm going to chain something on here, and I want to grab the substring. In this case, I want to start at 0 and grab two characters. And then I want to turn this entire thing into a number. So we'll just cast it into a number this way. And let's go ahead and test that to see if we solved a couple of these. Excellent. So we solved the ones where it's an even. Now, if it's not, then we know that it's not an even year. So it's always going to be one greater. So 1705 returns 18. So again, we can grab that substring. So we're going to grab first two digits. It's going to be equal to the year, toString, substring 02. So that gives us the first two digits. And we want to keep that as a number. And since we're repeating ourselves here, let's go ahead and put this at the top of our code and just get that from the very beginning. And now we can take this expression here and replace it in here. So all we have to say is first two digits. So now that works the same. We're turning that into a number. But down here, what we want to first do is we want to return a number, of course. Well, it's already, okay, never mind. So this is going to give us a string. We need to return a number. So the first thing we need to do is turn that into a number by saying first two digits, and then we want to add, since this is a number, then we want to add 1. So I think this may work actually. Okay, so the problem here is the test for year 89. Since we're doing modulus 100, of course this is not going to work if it's less than 100. So in this one edge case, we could just put this at the top, at the very top, and say if the year is less than 100, we just return 1. So that takes care of that case, and we test it. Should pass all of them. We'll see if it passes all the tests. Okay, so clearly that was a quick fix solution. It didn't actually solve our greater problem. So let's dig in to see what we're dealing with here. Obviously, there are larger numbers at stake and much smaller numbers at stake. So our attempt at using modulus 100 is not going to work very well. So I believe our solution may be close. I'm actually going to go ahead and see if there's something in the discussion down here. So you can always look at the comments and suggestions to see what other people are thinking about. We'll see. Okay, these are very useless. Okay, so this is not really helping us that much. At this point, my brain's so fried, we're going to go ahead and search this on Google Stack Overflow. We'll just say century from year JavaScript Stack Overflow. Just curious to see how other people solved this. Okay, so it looks like what they're doing here is using the math.ceiling function. Let's see what this is. Okay, so here's the ceiling function. It returns x rounded upwards to the nearest integer. So we'll go back and attempt this again and see all of those different test cases. So let's just grab one of them here. So 400, 390. And let's see what math.ceiling returns for that. Oh, and we have to divide it by 100. So let's do that again. So 4004. Which is what we're trying to get at because we round this up to the nearest 100. Okay, so that's basically the answer then. Couldn't think of that on my own here today. So let's go ahead and try that. Instead of all this stuff, let's just return it. Math.ceiling is year over 100. And this may not get the cases where it's an even, or maybe it does. Let's attempt it. All right, there you go. So that's very clever, but I guess in this case, when I was trying to solve it here, I did not go through the scenario in my head where the years would be, greater than say 1720 or 1930. Like, I didn't think about what if we have like year 20,000, something like that. So in this case, it's a little bit of the instructions, like they didn't, say a whole lot about what the input was going to be. They didn't say that we're going to, go up to a huge input like they ended up doing. So that's partially the instructions, and then it's partially, I should have thought of all the edge cases and should have thought of the fact that the number could be greater than 4 digits like this. So we solved the problem with a specific set of input, but not all of the possible input. And that's very common when you're solving coding challenges. You always have to think of the edge cases. So while I didn't get this the first time, it's definitely a good learning opportunity just to see, how it is when you're trying to solve coding challenges. All right, for this one, we're converting cat years and dog years and human years. So we're only going to get whole numbers, and we're only going to get human years 1 or greater. Okay, so 15 cat years for the first year, 9 cat years for the second year, and 4 for each year after that. 15 dog years for the first year, 9 for the second, and 5 after that. So notice we have some similarities in the first two. They both go up by 15 and 9 in the first 2 years. Okay, so what are we getting here? What's the input? I have a cat and a dog. I got them at the same time as kitten and puppy. That was human years ago. So we're going to get a number passed in here. Return their respective ages now. Okay. So the easiest one is going to be human years plus, or no, we just say human years in there. So that should be the answer to the first part of the array. The second two are a little bit harder. So we have to get the dogs and the cats. All right, so the first thing that we want to do, let's see. Let's say human years is 1. Well, in that case, we're going to return 15 for both of them. So let's make a variable here. And then we'll say if human years equals 1, we want to return this right here. So we're going to say human years, and then we're going to say the cat's age is going to be what? 15, and the dog's age will be 15. If the human years are equal to 2, let's see, we're going to add 9 to that. So we're going to return something very similar, but this time we're going to return 24 here. All right, and then the remainder, we're going to say in the first 2 years we get to 24 for both the dog and the cat, but then they increment by different amounts. So how do we solve this? Okay, so let's say cat excess years is going to be equal to human years minus 2. Or we'll just say, we can just say excess years and use this for both. So we're basically trying to find, how many years above the first 2 years are we looking at here? And then from there, we can probably just multiply it by whatever this multiple is. So we'll say extra dog, or no, we'll start with cat. Extra cat years equals excess years times, what, 4? And then for the dog years, we're going to do 5. So we're just going to make a new variable and say extra dog years. So then we just return at the bottom here, if we have not hit either of these logical statements, because if we return from here, everything's done. We don't reach any of the code below. But if we have not reached either of these code paths, we're going to reach this. And we're going to always return human years just as the number of years. But then we're going to say we know that we've got at least 2 years if we reach this code. So we'll say 24 plus the extra cat years. And then we'll say 24 plus extra dog years. Let's see if this gets it right. Awesome, we got it right. So that's how I would solve that problem. Let's see how other people would solve it. Okay, so this is interesting. It's a similar concept. We asked if it was the year 1 or year 2, and then we basically just did the same thing, just in less code. So I feel pretty good about that. We did pretty good on that one. So especially not being able to think. I've been going at this for a while now. All right, I think we have like 2 more in total. I'm gonna make it to the end. Our football team finished the championship. The result of each match looks like X:Y. Results of all the matches are recorded in the collection. All right, write a function that takes such collection and counts the points of our team in the championship. The rules for counting points. If X is greater than Y, 3 points. If X is less than Y, 0 points. If they're equal, 1 point. There are 10 matches total, and X is going to be between 0 and 4, or not between, it's going to be inclusive of 0 to 4, and then Y is going to be 0 to 4. Okay. So this games, let's just make this more specific. That's going to be a games array. We'll initialize by saying let total points equal 0, and we're going to set up a for loop. All right, so we're going to go through each, and we expect each value to equal something like this. So we'll just say value, and that's going to be games array with the index of I, which starts at 0. So just for reference, I'm going to say sample value in a comment, and this will be 3:1. All right, so the first thing I'm going to think about doing, since 3 and 1 are used for calculating this, I'm going to split them. So we're going to say parts are going to be equal to value dot split, and we're going to split it by a delimiter of a colon. So now let's console.log the parts of this array, and we're just going to see what that looks like. So these are the values that we're getting in each iteration of the for loop. So we're getting, 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, so on and so forth. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say all of these different scenarios. So we're going to say if parts 0, so the first one, if the first value, so x, so x and y, so the first one is x, so if parts 0, which is going to be x, we might as well break this out into a descriptive variable. So there's your x and there's your y, the first and second value of that array. And we're going to say if x is greater than y, we're just following the rules over here basically. We're going to do something. And if x is, we'll say else if x equals y. And then finally else, which is just basically going to be that last condition, which means x is less than y. Okay, so let's just put it in there. We'll say total points equals total points plus, and in this case it's going to be 3. And then down here, let's just use a shortcut because we can. So we'll do plus equal. This is just an operator that does the same thing as here, except just in a shorter way. So we'll do plus equal, and then in this case it's a tie, so it's 1 point, and then otherwise it's 0 points. So in this case we actually don't even need this last block because it's adding 0, which doesn't even matter. Let's return the total points here. All right, we passed it. Awesome. Not even going through the explanation there. I will assume that you're pausing the video to do that. Oh, that's an interesting solution right there. Not going to get into that though. Okay. At this point, I believe this is the last question. No, we finished it. Looks like we finished all of them. I don't know. I think we skipped this last one, the vowel count. No, we did that at the beginning. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel. Please. I'm very tired right now from going through all of these challenges together with you. Be sure to follow me on Code Wars, and I'll follow you back. And stick around for the next video in this lesson series. See you later.